Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if it's okay with you, I would very much like to continue on with our journey and exploration through this phenomenal set, which is known as Pioneers of African American Cinema, which was assembled through the great efforts of many, such as Jacqueline Stewart and Charles Musser. And we have a collection of these incredible works, again, within this single set. And it's a wonderful set indeed, and there are so many, it's a treasure, a real treasure. Now, among these treasures, and among the discs here, we have, in this Blu-ray version of the set, we have the fourth disc. And the fourth disc has the sound films, or examples of the sound film period of the very important and bold and inventive filmmaker from the early part of the 20th century. And this filmmaker is Oscar Micheaux. And so we have spoken about a number of his films already, both in the sound period and also in the silent film period, which are in part of this disc, but also in past discs as well, again, contained within this great set. Today, that brings us to the film on the fourth disc, which is described as being from 1932. We have the surviving elements of this film here. It's not the full, complete film, but we do have enough, I think, to get a sense of what the story is, or certain aspects or themes that are part of the story. And it is the film Veiled Aristocrats, again from 1932. What we have here is approximately 45 minutes. And so we can get a sense of what the story is. Again, there are things that are incomplete, but we can get the sense of what the story is, which is in essence about this young man, John, who we understand is a lawyer. And he comes back after being away from his home and from his mother and from his sister for a long time, about 20 years. And he comes back now having made his career. He comes back and he is reacquainted and is reunited with his mother and his sister. Now, what is so fascinating here is one of the themes of this film, and indeed of many of Oscar Micheaux film that we have talked about before. We have the theme of what John, the brother, who is again this very successful attorney, a very successful lawyer, but we understand too that perhaps, or indeed, one of the reasons why he was able to have this success in terms of finance and profession is due perhaps in part to the fact that we understand that he is passing as white. He is an African American man, but he has a light skin complexion. And when we meet his mother and his sister Rena, we also see that they too, and his sister as well, they have a light skin complexion. And so what this leads to in terms of the plot of the film, one of the main aspects of the plot of the film, at least in terms of what is surviving, is having to do with what John perceives as one of the only ways, if not the only way, for people like him and his family to, in a way, advance in the world. And that is to pass themselves as white in order to advance their careers, or perhaps in the situation of his sister Rena, to pass as white in order to marry a wealthy white man. And so this is the crux of the drama of this particular film, and that drama is made even more dramatic by the fact that the sister, Rena, we see her, and that she is in fact in love not with this wealthy white man, that we meet very briefly, but she is in love with someone else. And not only is she in love with someone else, but the person that she is in love with is an African-American gentleman of dark skin complexion. And so here we have one of those bold examples of Oscar Micheaux's filmography, where he, the filmmaker, is telling us or giving us a story of these particular human beings and how the social fabric of the time maybe compels the brother to feel the need to have to pass himself as white in order to achieve what he perceives as being a certain level of success, perhaps. And this means by which he seeks to achieve this by passing himself as white, but also by convincing his sister to do the same, brings with it a certain degree of psychological consequence, and also a certain bit of maybe social consequence as well. The social dynamic, I think, is expressed in terms of, say, the way in which the servant class dynamic is depicted in this film. That there are African American characters who are, say, part of the periphery, and we see song and dance numbers which are also part of the milieu, or the world of Oscar Micheaux and his sound films, as we know. There are moments where the action stops in order to get these great dance steps, and they are really great, by the way. We see these wonderful tap dance numbers, and the song and dance, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But also this gives way to the character suspense dynamics when the secret of the siblings, or particularly the brother, who is, as I say, passing himself off as white, the secret is discovered or revealed by the servants. And so we have this very interesting social dynamic of the servant class represented by these African American characters discovering the secret of these characters who are in a wealthier status, but who are also African American, but perhaps their status is due by virtue of the fact that they are passing themselves off as white. So this type of social dynamic, as revealed in this Oscar Micheaux film, is really very, very bold and very provocative indeed. So that is one level. And I mentioned also the other level, which I would suggest is psychological and the emotional impact. And we see this specifically in the story of the sister. The sister, we know, is in love with one man, but she is expected to pretend to be something that she is not in order to marry someone else or to be accepted by someone else who is white. And so this becomes this lie, not just to the world, but also to herself. And it has with it some very drastic and dramatic implications of an emotional and psychological nature. And so one of the sources of tension and indeed suspense of the film, Veiled Aristocrats, is, will the sister be able to do this or not? Will she be able to carry out the lie in order to achieve something that the brother perceives to be a step towards success? Is that really the case, or indeed will there be another turn of events that will convince the sister to go to the man that she really loves? And in order to do that, to, in a sense, acknowledge who she is and where she comes from, to forsake any hopes of, say, passing in the context of the wealthy society as depicted in this film, or as perceived as being successful from the viewpoint of her brother. So this is, I think, another bold and provocative way in which Oscar Micheaux, again, in the words of Charles Musser in the essay that's part of this booklet, this great booklet, this is how Oscar Micheaux, is dealing with or tackling themes of race in the context of the color line and crossing or blurring the divide that is set forth in the color line. Again, we have characters who are passing. So we have African American characters, but the nature of their skin complexion means that there is this way in which they are trying to, in a sense, pretend to be something that they are not. But this has certain social and financial and indeed emotional and psychological implications and consequences. And depending on the character, those consequences could be different. For instance, arguably, the consequences for the brother might or might not be the same as the consequences for the sisters. So it is a very bold and inventive and very provocative exploration of the color line, again in the hands of Oscar Micheaux, while also being an Oscar Micheaux sound work. As I say, there were moments where the film essentially stops to enjoy the music and the song and dance, and I think this is also very important. It's seen perhaps as a type of almost celebration, if you will, as well as being a means too of showing off the sound technology, which is still arguably in its infancy. Again, when we remember this work is from the early 1930s, so it's a really wonderful thing to see. Again, also we're still reminded too of the social dynamics and tensions between the classes, even though we understand that they are of the same racial background. So that is another bold and provocative situational cinematic technique of Oscar Micheaux, and it's something that we have seen in many a past Oscar Micheaux work in terms of the blurring of this color line. And that's something that I think the booklet, Charles Musser, and the essay they talk about in terms of the way in which the black and white photography is used here, and how we see, and we are reminded, for instance, at the very start of the film, films by Oscar Micheaux, about how the cast is an all-star colored cast. That's the wording that's used often the case in Oscar Micheaux's works, in the openings and the titles with the cast listing. But then when we see the works, and like we see in Veiled Aristocrats, we see how the light and shadow are capturing the complexion of these characters and the actors, such that perhaps almost it's to the point that Oscar Micheaux wants to make on purpose, which is to show us in visual terms the way in which they can be, in visual terms anyway, be seen as passing. In particular, the brother, when we first meet him, there is this way in which almost the light is very much, the way he's photographed very much pronounces this particular moment. And so when we realize that this is a very key aspect of the film, in fact the key aspect of the film, I think it makes the cinematographic techniques very much bold indeed. And again, in the hands of Oscar Micheaux, things like this I think are always done on purpose. Charles Musser, an expert in Oscar Micheaux films, has commented on this many a time. And so for these and other reasons, this is a film that in its story is bold and provocative, in its storytelling it's bold and provocative, in its cinematic techniques is bold and provocative. And again, with a filmmaker like Oscar Micheaux, it's really a truly thought-provoking experience indeed. There might be, of course, those criticisms to be made against this film. Again, Oscar Micheaux's sound films do have this sense sometimes of having a certain amateurish nature about them in certain sequences. There's a certain, maybe some might think that there's a flatness in some of the way in which the dialogue is presented, etc. And that might certainly be the case here in Veiled Aristocrats, although I think maybe when compared to some other works by Oscar Micheaux in the sound period that have these criticisms against it, I think a film like Veiled Aristocrats it has this way of presenting information that I think it maybe overcomes some of these criticisms that might be existing in other sound works from the Oscar Micheaux sound era. So that's another way to saying that this is, I think it's overcoming a number of technical, say, critical aspects that might have been seen elsewhere. They might still be there in some aspects, but there are other quote-unquote improvements in a certain manner of speaking, technical-wise. But at the same time, we do have to remember the bold technical choices made by him here, telling us a story that is so much part of Oscar Micheaux's storytelling technique and style, and always giving us a bold and very almost shockingly provocative look at the nature of race and race relations in terms of external relationships, but also the internal, and how they affect the family life and also the lives or the lives of oneself, and how they affect one's viewpoint of oneself, and how they may or may not have drastic consequences that could be positive or could be negative or could be something also quite ambiguous. Oscar Micheaux shows us this in such such a powerful way in films like this, which is called Veiled Aristocrats. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.